What are they looking at? What are they looking at, guys? Should I be scared to click forward, to click the...
That's why, to say the least, it's a bit odd with the Odyssey that Christopher Nolan, the big daddy of Hollywood, is playing the Hollywood game.
So they are changing the Odyssey. From the team that brought you Why is Snow White Latina? Why are there black people in Rings of Power? And Star Wars has gone woke, comes the latest online onslaught against the diverse cast of the Odyssey.
This movie should feel cinematic, larger than life, and instead it already feels weirdly modernized.
Christopher Nolan is directing a movie about Homer's Odyssey.
Our king Odysseus, the smartest of all the heroes. He led us for 10 years in the Trojan War, before his brilliant plan to build the great horse. The Trojans thought it was a gift and took it behind their walls. Then, out poured our soldiers. Odysseus led us to victory. People love stories. You were there?
And while the internet spent weeks arguing about Christopher Nolan's Odyssey, almost nobody talked about the movie that may understand Odysseus. Not the gods, not the monsters, not the spectacle, Odysseus himself. Because maybe, just maybe, the real tragedy of Odysseus was never fighting cyclopses or escaping sirens. Maybe the real tragedy was surviving long enough to realize home can't fully exist anymore. And that's why I think one of the most interesting Odyssey adaptations in years quietly disappeared, while the internet was too busy rage posting about trailers. Today I want to talk about The Return, a grounded, smaller, almost painfully human adaptation of Odysseus starring Ralph Fiennes. Yes, Voldemort. And somehow Voldemort actually understands Odysseus better than most blockbuster adaptations do. Not because the movie is bigger, because it understands something modern audiences often forget. Odysseus didn't want another adventure. Brother just wanted to go home. Christopher Nolan has reached a point where his movies stop being movies. They become online events. The second the trailer drops, the internet immediately splits into factions. Masterpiece, overrated, cinema is saved. And the reaction to Odyssey was kind of inevitable. Because adapting the Odyssey is weirdly dangerous. Everyone already has their own version of Odysseus in their head. Some people imagine a legendary warrior. Some imagine a genius strategist. Some imagine a mythological adventure. And some people, including me, remember the story as something way sadder. A man trying to crawl back home after years of war destroyed everything around him. But online discourse doesn't really reward that kind of conversation. It rewards instant reaction, outrage, memes, thumbnail emotions. The internet doesn't ask, what emotional interpretation is this adaptation going for? It asks, does this look cool enough? And that's important. Because most of the Nolan backlash wasn't actually about storytelling. It was aesthetic discourse. People arguing over armor, lighting, action, casting, historical accuracy, whether it looked too epic, whether it looked epic enough. And the funniest part of all this discourse is that we've already seen this happen before. People online now talk about Troy like it was some universal beloved classic. But when Troy released in 2004, people hated parts of it. Criticism complained it wasn't accurate enough. Mythology fans complained they removed the gods. Others thought it was too Hollywood, too action-focused, too emotionally shallow, too Gladiator. Sound familiar? Even Brad Pitt got backlash because people thought Achilles was a miscast, which is hilarious in retrospect because now an entire generation sees Troy as the modern Greek mythology movie. And that's how adaptation discourse works now. Every new version gets treated like it's destroying the source material forever. And then, 10 years later, people become nostalgic for it and suddenly it becomes the good adaptation. And I think Nolan's Odyssey is probably heading towards the exact same cycle. Because most of the internet backlash isn't really about accuracy, it's about ownership. People aren't defending Homer, they're defending the version of the story they imagine in their head. And the irony is, Odyssey becoming a giant blockbuster actually makes complete sense. Because modern audiences are trained to expect mythology as a spectacle. Huge armies, massive CGI landscapes, thunder, gods, fire, slow motion warriors screaming into the sky. 300. That's what a mythology has become in a blockbuster culture. But when you actually read the Odyssey, it often feels surprisingly intimate, lonely, exhausting, melancholic. Odysseus doesn't feel like a superhero. Half the time he feels like a man held hostage by history. And this is where I think the entire conversation around Odysseus, or the Odyssey, became fascinating. Because while people argued over spectacle, almost nobody talked about emotional truth. What does it actually feel like to be Odysseus? To survive war, lose your friends, spend years wandering, become unrecognizable, and return home as someone completely changed. That's the version of Odysseus I remember. And weirdly enough, that's the version almost nobody online seemed interested in discussing. And then there's The Return, a movie that came out quietly, without massive hype, without becoming an internet event, without endless discourse videos. And honestly, that alone already says something about modern movie culture. Because The Return isn't trying to become a cultural war. It isn't trying to dominate social media, it isn't built around spectacle. It's smaller, quieter, slower. And because of that, a lot of people probably ignored it. But the second I saw the trailer, something immediately stood out. This didn't feel like Odysseus the legend, it felt like Odysseus, the survivor, that man that finally came home. That difference matters a lot, because there's a version of the Odyssey where the focus is adventure, and there's another version where the focus is aftermath, and The Return seems deeply interested in aftermath. And then I sat down and watched it, and I gotta say, if you expect monsters, wars, or gods, this is not the movie for you. But if you expect to see Odysseus after monsters, wars, and gods, this is the movie for you. Ralph Fiennes plays Odysseus less like a triumphant hero and more like a man hollowed out by time. And honestly, that feels right to me, because by the time Odysseus returns home, he isn't a young conqueror anymore. The Trojan War already stole years of his life. Then the journey stole even more. And by the end, this man carrying grief, exhaustion, paranoia, trauma, survivor skills, emotional isolation, and I think modern adaptations sometimes struggle with this. They want Odysseus to feel larger than life. But there's something devastating about portraying him as painfully human. That's why the grounded tone works. The realism of this movie forces you to sit with the emotional consequences. War feels costly, death feels permanent, home feels distant, and Ithaca stops feeling like a fantasy kingdom. It becomes something much sadder. A life he's terrified he can no longer return to. That's powerful. And honestly, Ralph Fiennes is kind of perfect for this interpretation, not because he looks invincible, but because he looks tired. He carries intensity, age, restraint, sadness, the kind of face that feels like he has seen too much. Only his body and instincts remind you of who Odysseus used to be. The warrior is still in there, but it's no longer the man himself, which is exactly what Odysseus should feel like by the end of his journey. And yes, it is extremely funny to me that Voldemort might have delivered one of the most believable versions of Odysseus in modern cinema. That sentence should not work as well as it does, but here we are. Now, here's where the conversation gets interesting. Because I don't think The Return was ignored because people hated grounded storytelling. I think it was ignored because modern internet culture rewards a completely different kind of engagement. Think about how people consume movies online now. Most discussions don't happen after watching the film. It happens before the movie even releases. Trailers become discourse, casting become discourse, leaks become discourse. People consume the argument around the movie almost more than the movie themselves. And the bigger the reaction, the more the algorithm pushes it. Negativity spreads faster, outrage spreads faster, conflict spreads faster. A quiet movie about an aging war veteran trying to emotionally reconnect with his home simply cannot compete with Christopher Nolan's Odyssey changes everything, or Helen of Troy is black. That's just the reality of internet attention. And I think mythology specifically suffers from this, because modern audiences often approach myths like superhero franchises. Everything needs to be bigger, louder, more cinematic, more visually overwhelming. But mythology originally survived because these stories spoke to human fears: loss, mortality, pride, isolation, love, and war. The Odyssey isn't only about monsters. It's about distance from home, distance from peace, distance from the person Odysseus used to be. And maybe that's why quieter adaptations struggle online, because they ask audiences to sit with emotion instead of adrenaline. And the internet is very bad at slowness, very bad at reflection, and very bad at subtlety. Another thing I noticed is that a lot of discourse around the Odyssey feels weirdly disconnected from the actual emotional experience of reading it. People remember the highlights, the Cyclops, the Sirens, the Trojan Horse, but emotionally, the story often feels exhausted. Odysseus spends most of the narrative trying to end the journey. That's the tragedy. He doesn't want endless adventure, he wants stability, rest, home. And I think that's what The Return understands. It understands that the emotional core of Odyssey isn't conquest, it's longing, because longing is quiet, and the internet prefers screaming. So, why should anyone watch The Return? Especially when there's already massive adaptations coming out. Because I genuinely think there is something refreshing about seeing mythology treated like a human drama again. Not content, not franchise material, not spectacle first entertainment, human drama. And what I appreciate most is how grounded storytelling changes the meaning of everything. In a huge blockbuster adaptation, the danger is scale. You can accidentally turn suffering into a spectacle. Pain becomes visual entertainment. War becomes aesthetic. But grounding the story forces the emotional consequences to stay visible. A scar matters more, silence matters more, an exhausted face matters more. Even home itself starts feeling different, because Ithaca isn't just a destination anymore. It becomes an obsession, an idea, a memory. And that's honestly one of the saddest things about Odysseus. He spends years fighting to return home, only to come back as someone completely changed. That's not victory, that's tragedy mixed with survival. And I think modern blockbuster culture sometimes struggles with stories like that, because audiences are conditioned to expect emotional payoff through triumph. But the Odyssey is more complicated. Odysseus survives, but survival isn't the same thing as peace. And I love that The Return seems willing to sit inside that discomfort. Not everything needs to explode every 5 minutes. Not every mythological adaptation needs to feel like a theme park. Sometimes watching a broken man trying to reconnect with his own life is emotionally more powerful than watching another CGI battle. And maybe that sounds less exciting on paper, but emotionally it can hit way harder, especially today. Because I think a lot of people connect more with exhaustion than heroism right now. And Odysseus is exhausted, deeply, existentially. Not because he failed to survive the journey, but because surviving it changed him forever. Now, Do I think the aesthetic arguments are wrong, or that people shouldn't criticize the movie, or more specifically the trailer? No, and no. But, and here comes the big but. This is just a Hollywood movie. It ain't some history book, it ain't an actual scientific paper revealing that Odysseus looked like Matt Damon, or Spider-Man was in Troy, or that the shiny vampire from Twilight was chilling on Ithaca. Don't treat it like the biggest threat to Greece since the Persians came knocking. Treat it like any other fucking blockbuster. Talk about it a bit, argue whether it looks good or bad, make some memes, and then move on to the next movie. And maybe, just maybe, uplift the good adaptations more than endlessly feeding outrage around the bad ones. Because honestly, I do think the Nolan backlash probably hurt the return a little. The movie came out right when the discourse machine around the Odyssey started exploding online. And once the internet locks onto debate mode, quieter movies just get buried underneath the noise. Which is kind of ironic for a story that's ultimately about exhaustion. Anyway, thank you all for watching this long. Leave a like, share your opinions in the comments, and subscribe. And if you already seen the return, I really want to know what you thought about it.